Good morning, everyone. Welcome to SCS Science Talk. We have nearly 100 people already joined with us. And today, it's our honor to have Professor Harinath Chakrapani with us. And before we start the talk, I will briefly introduce myself. So my name is Diksha Gupta, and I'm Associate Director, American Chemical Society in India. I'm responsible for editorial, society programs, and services. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Harinath Chakrapani, who completed his undergraduate and postgraduate studies in chemistry from Loyola College and IT Madras, respectively. He moved to Duke University in 1999, USA, to pursue his postdoctoral studies, where he worked with Professor Thon and then also worked at National Cancer Institute. He joined IISER Pune in July 2009 as assistant professor, and now currently he is working as associate professor. His group works on design, synthesis, and evaluation of organic compounds that can produce reactive species in a spatio-temporally controlled manner as tools for biochemical and cell biological studies. Biological reactive species are produced during normal metabolism, but elevated levels can cause irreparable damage to cells. With these brief words, I would invite Professor Chakrapani to deliver his talk. Join me in welcoming Professor Chakrapani. Stage is over to you.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Diksha, for the invitation first, and then the kind introduction. So it's a great pleasure to be giving this webinar. So during these lockdown times, we are all trying to keep ourselves busy with engaging with science, and this is a very useful way to be in touch with what's going on in research. So I'm going to give you about 30 minutes of a lecture on what we have been doing in the past like 4-5 years in our lab. So the story basically starts in each of our lives. When I think all of you might remember your school chemistry labs, where you would have seen this contraption here, which is called the Kips apparatus, and this was actually developed by Petrus Kips, who's a Dutch pharmacist. He was actually not satisfied with the way the gases were generated in those times, and so he figured out this very elaborate setup that produces gases. So it is used to generate a variety of gases. And the particular gas that we are interested in, and which causes the smell in your life, is hydrogen sulfide. Is H2S. And so today the talk will focus on H2S. And see, the history of H2S actually starts somewhere in the in the 17th. Early recorded history starts in the 17th, 18th century. So H2S was known as a sewer gas, and it was characterized by Bernardino Ramazzini, who basically studied some of the sewage workers and found that they had all these symptoms of pain, irritation, and inflammation, and so on. And so he's attributed this to the gas that was produced in their workplace. So therefore, it was very well known at that point that there was this gas known as sewer gas, which is an irritant and so on. So after this, in the late 18th century, Carl Wilhelm Scheele discovered this compound this molecule as a pure species. So he was the first to do that, and subsequently its structure was characterized and was found to be H2S. Much into the 19th century, there was a lot of work done mainly on animal models. So, for example, Francois Chausset used this horse as a model, and he found that it was quite toxic to the animal if H2S was given through the skin, for example. Okay. It was also found towards the later part of 19th century that it's actually produced in bacteria. And in the 20th century, H2S, there was an explosion of many uses of H2S, or chemistry and biology of H2S was being discovered. And so it was found that it is being produced in mammalian cells, for example, in the 1940s. And there was also some suggestions about how it's going to be synthesized. There were some enzymes that were characterized, and so on. In the 1960s, there were a number of studies from mainly Russian groups which spoke about the various protective effects of H2S. But it was not until 1996 when the Kimura lab pretty much proved that H2S was produced in cells and that it mediated at what they thought was a physiologically relevant concentrations at that time was actually a neuromodulator. And after this, much into the late 90s and the past decade, there was a number of studies that were done on H2S, and we will not have time to look through even a summary of those. But what suffice to say is that there was a lot of interest in how H2S is being produced, in a artificial way. So, as you know, we are all chemists. We like to understand how life works, and we want to make models that can help understand, the effects of a small molecule like H2S, for example. And so, a number of groups actually synthesize these small compounds which generate H2S. So, one of these molecules, a few years back, entered phase 2 clinical trials, which is ATB346. Okay, so a lot has happened in the past 3 centuries. And this molecule is really important. Now, our lab is particularly interested in trying to understand the role of H2S in biology, and more specifically, can we develop, can we use this or exploit this unique properties of this molecule to develop a therapeutic? So, as I mentioned earlier, it is known to be a neuromodulator. Subsequently, it was also found to be a vasodilator, and it has a lot of other cardiovascular functions. And it is very well known in chemistry that H2S is actually an antioxidant. And in biology as well, it is known to be an antioxidant. There are some studies which are of interest, which show that H2S can be antiviral in nature, especially given the current pandemic situation caused by COVID-19 or SARS coronavirus. We are very interested in seeing if H2S has any antiviral properties. And there are a host of other beneficial properties for this. So the question is, how do we use this as a therapeutic? So if you look at a lot of studies that have been done in biology, they've used H2S as an inorganic salt. So you can buy sodium sulfide, Na2S, you can buy NaHS, and so on. And if you make a solution and dissolve this, it's going to produce H2S. So there are literally hundreds of studies which show that a Na2S or H2S, NaHS that is produced has very broad anti-inflammatory activity. And this is done by inhibition of what is known as reactive oxygen species. We'll look at this a little bit later, but reactive oxygen species are also known as ROS, mediates a number of cellular processes. But when it is produced in higher concentrations, it's actually it's actually harmful to cells. And therefore, we would like to have this, the ROS to be at the appropriate level. Now, looking at the time course of H2S generation, if you see H2S, if I make a solution of sodium sulfide and put it in a buffer, you will see a profile such as this, where you will just see a burst of H2S. Now, the problem with this is that H2S, being a gas, can actually rapidly escape from buffer under a variety of experimental conditions. So if you make a solution and treat cells with this, you don't know how much of H2S is actually produced. Now, what our lab is interested, and many other labs across the world are interested, is that how to produce H2S in a very controlled manner. So now let's take a minute and define what the problem is. So what we would like to make a small molecule that gets across the cell membrane and perhaps to the tissue of your interest. And it should respond to some stimulus. For example, it can be high level of ROS. It can be light if you're interested in looking at signaling. And it should get cleaved. This hybrid should get cleaved and it should produce H2S. So in addition to designing the molecule for it to be cell permeable, you also must have some design principles that allow it to get cleaved within cells. So the profile of H2S generation is something like this. So it would not produce any H2S until it is exposed to the stimulus, and then there would be a burst of hydrogen sulfide. So we started working on this, and we thought that let's look at the possibility of using a molecule known as carbonyl sulfide. So carbonyl sulfide is basically carbon dioxide with one oxygen replaced with sulfur. Now, if you see the oxidation state of carbonyl sulfide, it is the same as an H2S, which is -2. Secondly, there's an enzyme that is produced, that is present in nearly all cells, which is known as carbonic anhydrase, which hydrolyzes the COS to produce H2S. So there is a basal rate at which COS is going to get hydrolyzed in cells to produce H2S, and then in the presence of this enzyme, it's greatly accelerated. So therefore, we can now redefine the problem and say that we would want to make compounds that get into the cell, get cleaved, and produce COS. So Preeti, who is here with us today, started working on this project. And what we felt was that it's possible to produce COS if we can think about an intermediate such as this intermediate 1 as shown here. Now, if you look here, if you push arrows, you can actually kick out a leaving group. In this case, if X is a nitrogen, then it would be an amine. If X is oxygen, then it would be a phenol or alcohol. So if you push arrows, you will produce COS. And like I mentioned earlier, it's going to be accelerated by, the hydrolysis is going to be accelerated by carbonic anhydrase to produce H2S. Now, how do we generate this intermediate? The way we generate this intermediate is through a self-cumulative strategy as shown here. Now, if this group can undergo self-accumulation to produce this kind of an intermediate, then what we could put here is various stimuli responsive functional groups which can get cleaved to produce this self-cumulative intermediate, which can go on to produce eventually H2S. So with this strategy in mind, Preeti started synthesizing these molecules. And I will not go into all the details of synthesis, but it's fairly well developed. So you can start with this chloride, convert it to this pivalloyl oxymethyl iodide, and so on. And keep in mind, we are looking at a mild signal in the beginning. We want to use esterase. So this group that is present here is going to get cleaved by esterase to produce H2S and COS. And so subsequently, you make the thiol, and then the thiol is actually converted to the corresponding carbonothioates and carbamothioates as shown here. Now, these molecules were used as a proof of concept for us to understand whether this strategy works or not. The yields are pretty all right in general, and they can be made in multiple milligram quantity for our testing, for our studies. So the first compound, the compound that we tested out was the one with this amine. And so the protocol that we followed was we took this molecule, and as I mentioned earlier, it gets cleaved over here, and you can imagine that there's going to be a loss of formaldehyde to produce the intermediate that I described earlier, and eventually it should produce H2S. So one of the standard ways for looking for H2S is this assay or test called as methylene blue. So methylene blue is a highly colored compound that is produced when H2S is exposed under these conditions to these reagents. So you get a very characteristic absorption spectrum as shown here with a lambda max at around 676 nanometers. So when we did this experiment, we find that in the presence of the enzymes, that is esterase and carbonic anhydrase, we see cleavage of this molecule to produce H2S. We've also done several independent measurements of hydrogen sulfide. I will not go into them in the interest of time. But the important question that we wanted to ask was, does this produce H2S in cells? So for this, we use this dye as shown here, which is sensitive to H2S and gets cleaved to produce a full fluorophore, which is fluorescein. So using this reported dye, what we did was we exposed cells, in this case MCF7, to this molecule and imaged for fluorescein and found whether and look for a signal for the production of H2S. And indeed, when we see a dose-dependent increase in the fluorescence signal, suggesting that this compound is permeable and it's able to enhance H2S within cells. With this proof of concept in mind, we moved on to one of the interests that we have, which is to address inflammation. So as I mentioned earlier, reactive oxygen species, elevated reactive oxygen species, is associated with inflammation. So if you see what ROS are, they are basically this oxygen, reduced forms of oxygen. So if you add an electron to oxygen, it forms superoxide radical anion, and subsequently one more electron can produce hydrogen peroxide, which in the presence of metal ions such as Fe2+ can do Fenton chemistry to produce hydroxyl radical. Hydroxyl radical is one of the most reactive species that is encountered in biology, and it can indiscriminately damage various macromolecules, including DNA, lipids, and proteins, and so on. So therefore, one of the major causes for the deleterious effects of ROS is hydroxyl radical. However, since hydroxyl radical is very short-lived, we have to look for other ROS which are produced. So H2O2, on the other hand, is fairly stable. It accumulates in cells, and it can actually be measured with some reliable, it can be actually reliably measured. So we use H2O2 as a marker of elevated ROS. One of the functional groups that is sensitive to hydrogen peroxide is this boronate ester. I think many of us would know this based on our knowledge of organic chemistry. So you can oxidize this boronate ester, and it can produce a phenol. So we set things up. So we have a functional group that is sensitive to hydrogen peroxide, and it can get oxidized to produce a phenol. And so we then suggested that we could make this kind of a molecule, which can then get oxidized to produce the intermediate that we showed earlier. And in the conditions that we use, it should get hydrolyzed and produce H2S. So this will give us some level of selectivity, because this compound should get activated only under conditions where there is elevated ROS. So in the design that we used, we incorporated a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. In this case, we chose mesalamine, because the molecule that is under investigation in phase 2 clinical trials is actually a hybrid of a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, or NSAID, and H2S. So we wanted to understand if we could A, synthesize this hybrid, and B, evaluate the efficacy. So in this project, Preeti was joined by Shweta, who was a fifth year undergraduate in our lab, and she spent about a year and a half, year or so, working on this project. She's presently pursuing her doctoral studies in the USA. So she made this compound, they both made this compound, and they studied this. And we find that there is a very nice increase in signal attributable to the production of H2S in the presence of hydrogen peroxide. So we have a molecule that can be a hybrid that is activated by ROS. It's also, we found using our cellular studies, that it is fairly well tolerated, and it's selectively activated by hydrogen peroxide. However, when we tested for the antioxidant activity, the activity was not impressive. So then we went back to the drawing board, and we wanted to see how H2S acts as an antioxidant. So it's known in literature that when under oxidative conditions, there is this antioxidant response proteins, which are known as NRF2 and KEAP1. So these actually dimerize. I mean, these are a complex, and under oxidative conditions, H2S can do what is known as a persulfidation, which is a post-translational modification. So once it does this persulfidation, then NRF2 actually locates or translocates to the nucleus and binds to what is known as an antioxidant response element. This antioxidant response element starts synthesizing these enzymes which are involved in antioxidant response. So some of these enzymes are heme oxygenase. Heme oxygenase is a very important antioxidant enzyme which breaks down heme to produce a molecule known as carbon monoxide, which can actually have good antioxidant activity. There are also enzymes such as glutathione S transferase, which is GST, which is a phase 2 detoxification enzyme that is used in binding or covalently modifying electrophiles and kicking them out of cells. Lastly, there's also this enzyme which is known as NQO1, which is known as NADPH dehydrogenase quinone. And what this does is actually it reduces quinones. It's a 2-electron reducing enzyme. And these together help the cell protect itself from oxidative stress that is caused by the presence of xenobiotics. Xenobiotics are compounds that are added to that are added to cells. Now, in this design, what we did was we took up this molecule. This is a quinone, and these quinones are known to undergo 2-electron reduction, and they would form this dialate. And this dialate would then rearrange or lactanize to produce the same intermediate that we were looking at previously. So we thought that this might be a strategy by which we would be able to produce H2S under conditions wherein it is relevant. Now, if this enzyme is produced in a higher quantity under oxidative stress, then it's likely that H2S would be produced under these conditions, and therefore it might be beneficial. So we went ahead and synthesized this compound, and we again used the NSAID here. And just to show you here a different set of data, which we used here, we used electrode. This is a hydrogen sulfide sensitive electrode. And in the presence of the enzyme, we see a nice signal that corresponds to the production of H2S. Now, we evaluated the antioxidant potential of this molecule, and I'll just go through this data a little bit quickly. So we used a known reactive oxygen species generator, and this was the number of cells that we found that were viable. So here we use DLD1 colon carcinoma cells as the model system. And in the presence of the negative control, which doesn't have any, which doesn't have a sulfur, we don't see much of a response. But when we add 50 micromolar of our compound, this hybrid, we do see an increase in the number of viable cells, which means that there is some protection afforded by the presence of this hybrid. However, we were not very happy with this antioxidant activity, and it's at best moderate, because it's unlikely that we would be able to work with 25 micromolar of a compound. So therefore, now we moved on to actually see if we can go back to the drawing board and check if we can improve the activity. But to quickly summarize this, we have a molecule, we have a series of compounds which can actually be used to produce H2S in cells. And these are quite versatile, and they can be used, a number of stimuli can be used to cleave them. And there's also a provision to prepare an NSAID hybrid, which means that they can probably be used or taken forward from a pharmacological standpoint. Of course, we were not the only ones that worked on this. There were multiple groups in the US that also published around the same time that we did on similar compounds. To address this problem, we need to identify the problems. The problems are basically, first of all, the antioxidant was very weak. And second, the electrophilic byproduct, which is the quinone method that is formed, is actually not useful. So going into the project, we knew that this quinone method was actually fairly toxic. But in our hands, we found that it was quite well tolerated, these molecules. However, we are very much aware of the problem, and we want to redesign the molecule so that we can improve it. So in order to redesign it, we went back to the literature and looked at what are known as persulfides. See, persulfides, all of us are familiar with water and hydrogen peroxide. So much like hydrogen peroxide is a better nucleophile and a better acid, persulfides are actually better acids and are much better nucleophiles. Some of you may be familiar with this term called as alpha effect. Now, in biology, there is a post-translational modification known as protein persulfidation. So here, a sulfhydryl group is actually attached to a cysteine residue. So let's walk through this a little bit. If you take a regular protein, and this protein under oxidative conditions can actually undergo oxidation to produce this sulfonate. These sulfonates are, if that cysteine is actually catalytically active, then these sulfonates are going to deactivate the protein. So if you imagine that there could be a persulfide that is attached, now this persulfide under oxidative conditions is going to produce an S-sulfonate. And this S-sulfonate can actually get cleaved to give you back the protein. And now if this protein, if the thiol is actually responsible for the catalytic activity, it helps protect the protein. Not just that, it has been suggested that protein persulfides enhance the catalytic activity of some molecules, of some proteins. So therefore, we became very interested in generating persulfides. Lastly, to convince you, here is another study that shows the power of persulfides. So using this system, this is a trisulfide based on glutathione. You can actually generate this glutathione persulfide and glutathione. And using a similar study, you can also produce GSH and GSH. Now, under these conditions, what we can do is we can actually study how well these two systems are actually going to be consuming hydrogen peroxide, or we can see how well they are having an antioxidant activity. So if you see this chart here on the y-axis, there is a percentage of hydrogen peroxide consumed, which means the higher the activity, the higher the percentage of H2O2 that is consumed, the better the antioxidant activity. So the system that we looked at here, which is with the trisulfide, which actually produces a glutathione persulfide, is far superior not just to glutathione, but also to hydrogen sulfide. So therefore, we shifted our focus to producing persulfides, which are much better than thiols or H2S in quenching H2O2. So here is the design that we used. So the molecule should be cell permeable. It should get cleaved under these conditions and produce a persulfide. So in order to generate the persulfide, we looked at this reaction called as the retro-Michael reaction. Retro-Michael reaction, there are a few examples of this in literature. So if you take this kind of a conjugate, then it should enolize, and then if you push arrows, it kicks out this thiol and gives you back this electrophile. So based on this, we thought that we could generate this enol in situ, and if this enol undergoes rearrangement, it should kick out a persulfide and produce this alpha beta unsaturated aldehyde. And if this AR group is actually the benzene ring, then it would produce cinnamaldehyde, which is generally recognized as safe by FDA. So Prerna came up with this idea that if you mask this enol in the form of a boronate ester, then we already know that this boronate ester should get cleaved by hydrogen peroxide and give you this intermediate, which will produce this persulfide. So I'm going to skip the synthesis and so on, but we made this molecule and we studied the kinetics of decomposition of this molecule in the presence of hydrogen peroxide. And we find that there's a nice decomposition of this molecule, and the rate constant was found as follows. Next, we studied the formation of cinnamaldehyde, which is the byproduct, not with this molecule, but with a comparable system. And the rate constant for that was found as 0.1275. So looking at these two numbers, it seems like the first step is actually the slower step, which means that once this molecule undergoes oxidation, then this intermediate that is produced doesn't hang out very long, and it actually rapidly rearranges to produce the persulfide and cinnamaldehyde. Persulfides, unfortunately, are quite unstable and are difficult to detect. So we had to carry out this experiment in the presence of an electrophile, such as fluorodinitrobenzene, and we were indeed able to measure the rate of formation of this persulfide by following the formation of this product. And here again, the rate constant was found as around 0.15, which is larger than the original rate constant that we started out with. So therefore, oxidation of hydrogen peroxide is likely the rate determining step. So with this result in hand, Prerna went ahead and studied if this molecule is actually antioxidant in nature. So here, again, she used a known ROS generator, and she found that there was very good protective activity of this molecule in this cellular system. We also wanted to study if this protection was afforded just because the molecule reacts with hydrogen peroxide. And so we synthesized this compound, which is a negative control. And this molecule actually reacts with H2O2, but does not produce any persulfide. And so we don't see much of a protection, even up to 100 micromolar, afforded by this compound. Therefore, this strategy appears to be very promising. Here, again, there are multiple research groups across the world which are working on this. A few of them in the US, and in India, Professor Pradeep Singh from IIT Kharagpur and his lab have developed some nice strategies to generate persulfides. We, of course, have this problem that the compound the byproduct that is formed is moderately electrophilic, and our lab is presently working on trying to improve this activity. So now let's go back to the timeline that I showed you about H2S. So things look really great. It has very good antioxidant activity, and we have an NSAID that is entering phase 2 clinical trials. There are a few other molecules which are under preclinical studies and so on. So why did I put a question mark after bright future? The reason for this is because H2S has some effects which can be a little harmful. So the first, we got interested in antibiotic resistance and the role of H2S in this. So I'll explain to you why there is a problem in this in delivering H2S. Now, if we, our lab was very interested in understanding the stress response. So we designed this compound, which is shown here, which should be activated by this enzyme which is produced in bacteria known as nitroreductase. So nitroreductase reduces this nitro group to an amine, and then subsequently, if you push arrows, it produces this intermediate, which can undergo hydrolysis to produce H2S. And using this tool, we were able to we felt that we could study precisely the role of H2S in how bacteria respond to antibiotic-induced stress. So these molecules were synthesized by Vinayak, who's presently a postdoc, and Sharath, who's just recently graduated with a PhD in the US. And then we went ahead and studied whether these compounds produce H2S. So we used this dye that is sensitive to hydrogen sulfide. So it has an azide group. It undergoes reduction to form an amine, and it gives a signal at emission signal at 520 nanometers. And indeed, when we add this enzyme nitroreductase, we do see a signal which suggests that the molecule is able to produce H2S. Then we went ahead and collaborated with Dr. Amit Singh in the Indian Institute of Science, and he helped us study whether this molecule is cell permeable or not. So here is the data which shows flow cytometry data, which shows that the molecule permeates E. coli and is able to produce H2S. And here is the negative control, which should undergo reduction but should not produce H2S, and indeed it doesn't. And here is the positive control, which is sodium sulfide. Using this tool, Amit and his lab studied multi-drug resistant E. coli strains, which are derived from urinary tract infections. And he found that H2S has a very crucial role to play in responding to antibiotic-induced stress. Basically, at this end of the study, we found that inhibiting the biosynthesis of H2S is really important in developing or in making bacteria respond better to antibiotics. And so our lab is now presently working on developing compounds that can inhibit the biosynthesis of H2S in these systems. So to give a picture, H2S can have a bright future if we have better tools that can help detect, generate, as well as dissipate. By dissipate, I mean inhibit biosynthesis. And through using these tools, we will be able to have a much better, if not complete, understanding of H2S biology. And perhaps a bright future for this smelly gas is in store. With that, I would like to conclude and thank all my research group members, my present members, who wonderful team of researchers who are highly motivated and keep me on my toes all the time. I'm also grateful to alumni who have graduated from our lab, and several of them are doing extremely well. And none of this would be possible without good collaborations. So I'm very grateful to Amit Singh from the Indian Institute of Science, who worked very closely with us on this H2S project. Deepak Saini, who continues to work with us on mammalian aspects of H2S. Raj Chopra, who in Central Drug Research Institute helps us with a lot of antibiotic-related work. Siddesh and Amrita from IISER Pune, who have been we have developed several projects around redox biology with them. I'm also grateful to the funding agencies, DST, DBT, and of course, IISER Pune. And finally, I thank you all for your patience, and I'll be very happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Hari, for such a fascinating and insightful talk. I'm sure audiences found it interesting.